What if the moment Washington decided to capture Nicolás Maduro began not in the White House, nor in a courtroom, but in my grandmother's kitchen in Maracay, when the gas ran out, the lights died, and we learned how to cook rice with memories instead of fire. I was born Venezuelan, which means I was born into oil. Not the shiny kind you see in advertisements, no. I was born into the idea of oil, the promise of it, the myth that beneath our soil slept a treasure so vast it would protect us from hunger, from fear, from history itself. As a child, I believed that myth. We all did. In my early years, Venezuela still felt like a country standing tall. The supermarkets were full. The bolívar still had meaning. My father worked at a state-linked company, and my mother ran a small shop that sold everything from batteries to candy bars imported from Miami. On Sundays, we ate arepas stuffed with cheese so thick it stretched like hope itself. Politics existed, but it lived far away, like thunder on a distant mountain. When Nicolás Maduro took power after Hugo Chávez died, many of us didn't immediately panic. We were tired, yes, skeptical, maybe, but we thought continuity meant stability. We told ourselves that institutions were stronger than one man, that oil would keep flowing, that the world needed us as much as we needed it. We were wrong. The first cracks appeared quietly. Prices changed overnight. Then they changed again by noon. My mother began erasing numbers from price tags more often than she wrote new ones. Then the shelves began to thin. Not empty, just thinner, like a body losing weight too fast. At the same time, the language from the government hardened. Maduro spoke constantly of enemies, imperialists, traitors, saboteurs. Every shortage had a foreign cause. Every failure was someone else's fault. The United States became the main character in every speech, a shadowy giant blamed for everything from inflation to bad weather. But on our side of the radio, something else was happening. We watched oil production fall, not slightly, dramatically. Refineries broke down, skilled engineers left the country. PDVSA, once a symbol of national pride, began to rot from the inside. Corruption, mismanagement, and political loyalty replaced competence. Still, Maduro stayed. Elections came, but faith did not. Protests rose, and so did the number of funerals. Young men with flags faced armored vehicles. Mothers screamed their sons' names into the tear gas. And somewhere far away, in Washington, people began to notice. At first, the United States spoke the language of diplomacy, statements, sanctions, warnings. They framed the crisis in familiar terms: democracy under threat, human rights abuses, electoral fraud. But from where I stood, the tension felt deeper than speeches. You see, Venezuela is not just another troubled nation. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. For decades, we had been an energy backstop, a strategic counterweight, a supplier that mattered. When our oil stopped flowing freely, when it became politicized, weaponized, and increasingly entangled with rivals like Russia, China, and Iran, alarms rang far beyond Latin America. Maduro didn't just mismanage the state, he reoriented it. Oil contracts shifted, military cooperation deepened with America's adversaries, intelligence ties grew darker and harder to track. Caracas became a hub, not just for ideology, but for logistics, for sanctions evasion, for quiet alliances that made Washington nervous in a way no speech ever could. Then came the indictments. The U.S. Department of Justice accused Maduro and his inner circle of narco-terrorism, painting him not as a head of state, but as the leader of a criminal enterprise. A price was placed on his head. Headlines screamed. Analysts debated. But to me, sitting in a half-dark apartment, that moment felt like something else. It felt like a decision had been made. The turning point, I believe, came when the crisis stopped being containable. Millions of us fled. Not thousands, millions. We crossed borders on foot. We slept in bus stations in Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. The largest migration in modern Western Hemisphere history unfolded in real time. Entire cities changed. Governments wobbled. The region strained. And the Maduro government did not bend. Instead, it survived. Somehow, impossibly it survived. Sanctions, protests, international isolation. It survived because repression was effective, because the opposition fractured, and because external allies helped keep the lights on just enough to avoid collapse. From Washington's perspective, this was no longer just a moral failure, it was a strategic one. Here was a government accused of massive corruption, tied to transnational crime, aligned with U.S. adversaries, sitting atop critical resources and proving resilient to every traditional pressure tool. Regime change through influence had failed. Economic pressure had failed. Diplomacy had failed. So the narrative changed. Maduro was no longer framed merely as an illegitimate president. He became a criminal fugitive, a target, someone who could, in theory, be removed without invading a country, by capture, by extradition, by force masked as law enforcement. Operation names floated through whispers. Failed incursions like Operation Gideon became cautionary tales, but the idea itself never died. And here is the truth that stings the most. For many Venezuelans, the thought of Maduro being captured did not feel shocking. It felt inevitable. So what was the real reason the United States decided to capture Nicolás Maduro? From where I stand, not as an analyst, not as a politician, but as someone who lived through the collapse, it wasn't just about drugs. It wasn't just about democracy. And it certainly wasn't just about one man. It was about control and a world where disorder spreads fast. It was about a regime that outlasted pressure and rewrote the rulebook on survival under sanctions. About a state that collapsed inward yet refused to fall outward. About a leader who turned a country's suffering into a shield and dared the world to act. Maduro became a symbol of something Washington feared, the normalization of defiant, criminalized states that survive outside the system and teach others how to do the same. But here is the lesson I carry, heavier than any geopolitical theory. When powerful nations decide a leader must be captured, it is never only about that leader. It is about everything that failed before that decision, and everyone who paid the price while the world debated. We paid with hunger, with silence, with exile, with time stolen from our lives. And whether Maduro is ever captured or not, the real story, the one written in dark kitchens and empty shelves, will never appear in an indictment. Because history, like oil, seeps into places maps do not show, and it stays there long after the headlines move on.